Welcome to the Conquer Food podcast with Craig and Paula Williams, where we share tips, tricks and strategies from the coalface of the weight loss industry in the UK. We're going to help you to think, eat and move better. Ultimately, we're going to help you finally gain control and conquer food. Hey, welcome to the Conquer Food podcast. Today I want to talk a little bit about emotional eating. It's something that I think everybody kind of understands and experiences on some level. And so that's my topic today. It's just me. I've not got anyone to talk to. So whether that's a good thing, bad thing, I don't know. Let me just run through some of the things I'm actually going to talk about. So I'm going to talk fundamentally about emotional eating. I'm going to talk about what are some of the causes of emotional eating. I'm going to talk about how to know if you're an emotional eater or not, how to manage emotional eating or how to change it. And then also I'm going to talk a little bit about how to identify your emotional eating triggers. The idea being that if you can identify them, maybe you can change the programming that you have attached to those triggers. Okay, so that's the idea of today's podcast. So let's get right into it. So obviously, when we talk about like emotional eating, what is that? Now, I'm a massive believer that the idea of eating for hunger, we lost that. We gave that up a long, long time ago. Rarely do we actually eat for hunger nowadays because food is just so plentiful. And I know, even now, some people are falling on hard times. You've got to go to the food bank and all that kind of stuff. There's still an abundance of food around. And, it's not like we're having to go out and wrestle a bloody woolly mammoth to get food and all this kind of stuff. It is just everywhere, and rarely does the average person eat because of hunger nowadays. So why do we eat? Well, one of the first things is boredom, or one of the biggest things I think is boredom. We get a lot of people that come to camp and it's just like, they live on their own. They don't go out much, they're fed up with the TV and all that kind of stuff. And it's just boredom, we just sort of sit there and we're like, a bit bored now, what am I going to do? And food and eating just becomes the default setting, and you start to eat just to break up that boredom. When we've got nothing to do, or even when what we are doing is pretty mundane and we don't enjoy it. You think about like work. Some people go to work and they hate it. And, food just breaks up that monotony because we do get pleasure, we get enjoyment from food. So boredom, is a massive one. Another one is sort of learned habits and saboteurs. Learned habits, it's things that you pick up throughout life, primarily in your sort of childhood where, it just becomes habit that you reach for food. Paula talks a lot about when she used to go and see her grandma, which she loved dearly, but her grandma was a massive feeder. And every time Paula fell over and banged a knee or, she was a little bit upset or school wasn't great, she'd go, come on, let's go and have cake. And cake became the default setting, the habit to change that emotion, and that's what we're talking about when we're actually talking about emotional eating. And then saboteurs, lots of people will look, not consciously, but maybe even subconsciously or whatever, look to kind of sabotage what you're trying to do. If you're trying to lose weight or eat healthy or eat less or whatever, some people kind of seem to go out their way to sabotage that, and my big thing, my thought behind that is that guilt shared is guilt, guilt halved is guilt shared, or guilt shared, guilt halved. Whatever way you want to look at it is just like, if they can bring in 12 donuts and everybody in the office can have one, well, that almost justifies their, having that donut in the first place. So there are like those little habits that we've picked up in saboteurs. And I'm sure if you take time to think about it, there'll be times when something happens and, your default setting is food. Maybe even like, you meet up with an old mate and you're like, yeah, we gotta get together. Let's go and get a bite to eat. Let's go and have a meal. And I did the same thing. I reached out to someone who I hadn't seen for quite a while because of lockdown and everything, and I said to him, let us know when you're free, and we'll get together and have a bite to eat. And it just becomes kind of habit, and that's what we do. Food is much more than just giving us nutrients nowadays. It can be a celebration. It can be, a pacifier to some crappy emotions or whatever. The next one is, if you're kind of struggling with finances, you've got work stress, or maybe even like awkward social interactions or something like that, then, food can kind of increase the cravings that you've got, and you can turn to food to kind of get past that. Stress relief is actually a massive one. We see that a hell of a lot where we just, when we get stressed, there's something going on in the body that is just like, we're not happy with. The body wants to be in homeostasis, and whatever form of stress you're experiencing, it feels weird, it feels strange, and we don't like it. The body does not like it at all. But once we eat, we then have a state in the body that we're used to. We're used to those feelings of eating, and because we're kind of moving and doing stuff, it can just take us mind off that stress a little bit. But stress relief is a massive one. I'm going to talk a little bit about that later on. Comfort food for whatever, it's a weird one, the old comfort food, because I've seen it where, people just absolutely batter themselves with comfort food after a breakup or something, something's gone wrong in a significant loss in their family or whatever. And I've seen people bounce the other way, where they just completely stop eating. It just doesn't always seem to be like a rhyme and reason as to why we either overeat or undereat when something goes on like that. Okay, but comfort food, I'm sure you recognize that. Times when I don't really fancy like a little bit of lean protein and some fresh veg. I'm gonna have some ice cream and a bloody hot dog or a pizza instead. We comfort ourselves with food. Guilt is another one, like feelings of guilt. Guilt is a really destructive emotion in my eyes. I think it's behind a lot of the distress that we experience. We kind of feel guilty, and sometimes the guilt is a gift from other people. It's not something that you kind of generated yourself. Think back to when you're growing up, and it's like you've perhaps got a bag of sweets or whatever, and then someone's like, "Come on, share them out, give them to you." Share them out to your friend or the class or your brother and sister or whatever, and we sort of become guilty, or something goes on. My big thing was, as you're growing up, tough Yorkshire family, no nonsense. If you hurt yourself and cried, well, you just didn't cry in public, so stop it, stop it off, and you feel guilty about that, and that emotion's got to be changed in some way. And food is often the easiest way to kind of change that emotion. Again, if you look back in your own past, maybe there's stuff there that, people around you, significant adults or whatever, just maybe even the situation just made you feel guilty. And because of that, you often turn to food, and that's become a habit now. Shame is another one. When you're a little bit you feel a little bit shameful and ashamed of what you've done. We all kind of make mistakes. And the thing about mistakes and behavior is that, that's not you as a person. It's just your behavior. It's separate. It's two separate things. But it does have an effect on our eating. And then another one, which is physiological stuff, which is linked to all these kind of things, is, extreme levels of cortisol. Now, cortisol is a hormone, in our body. It's very much the stress hormone. And if you are riddled with cortisol, as a lot of people that come to Team Bootcamp are, you're naturally, you're going to eat more. There's drivers out there that are just pushing you to eat more. And, like I said, because of modern day life, the way it is, because it's so complex, because our body just didn't evolve to live in this environment that we're in, it's just riddled with cortisol, and it's a real effort. It's not a real effort, because it actually can be done quite relatively easy. But you've got to mindfully reduce cortisol and work hard to de-stress, to reduce it. Really focus on your sleep, focus on your rest, focus on meditation. All this kind of stuff, and food as well. Some foods will trigger more cortisol. So it's a real complex situation, but it all starts with kind of maybe even listening to this podcast and then just following some of the steps that I'm going to talk about in a bit, and working to control all that kind of stuff. So basically, emotional eating, it is a cycle, and it's like occasionally using food as a pick-me-up or a reward or to celebrate, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. But if you do it too much, and this cycle can obviously, like a small snowball starting to roll down a hill, it just gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and eventually the momentum that it's got, you just can't stop it. And this is quite often what happens, and it becomes, this emotional eating cycle just gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and all of a sudden, you've really got a problem, because it's what we consistently do that really counts. And if you consistently turn into food every time you have a bad day, good day, whatever, you're going to start engineering bad days and bad events just to get the food, and it really does become that cycle. So I don't know if you are an emotional eater. Well, good news, bad news, whatever way you want to look at it, in some level, everyone is an emotional eater. Emotions, we all act on emotions. Everything we do is based on emotions. If we did things on logic, then we'd all be walking around with incredible bodies, incredibly healthy, getting just the right amount of sleep, the right amount of rest. Our lives are completely different. We're not logical beings as much as we want to be and think we are. We're not, and we act on emotions. We buy things on emotions. We eat things on emotions. It's just what we are. So there's no point even questioning whether you are an emotional eater. I think the key thing is, there's obviously a spectrum, as there is in many things, and it's where you are in that emotional eating spectrum. Because, some people obviously have got a much worse emotional eating habit or routine, a cycle or whatever than others. So that's kind of way that you need to look at it. But some of us are much more likely to binge eat. And by binge eating, I don't just sort of eating like loads and loads of food, but what it can also mean is that you constantly graze. We can overeat by constantly grazing, by constantly eating, and we don't eat a great deal in one major sitting, but we do kind of eat throughout the day quite a lot, and so there's a couple of different ways of like binge eating. The grazing one is one that's often forgotten, because whenever we're kind of eating on the move, or we're kind of just nitpicking as we go through the day, we don't always account for that stuff, and when you come to do like your nutritional recall, or you do a nutrition diary, a food diary or whatever, you can't always account for it. And you certainly can't account for the quantities that you've eaten. If you're kind of grazing on nuts all day, like how many nuts have you really eaten? You don't know. And I had a personal training client once, and we managed to get them off sort of sweet, sugary drinks and sugary snacks, and they started eating sunflower seeds, right? But the weight didn't really change a great deal. And when we kind of dove into it, it turned out that, literally have a bag of sunflower seeds on his desk all the time, and then he'd just be picking away at them, and he'd do a bag of sunflower seeds a day, which, calorie-wise, that is a lot of food, but he just, because they're so small, it just gets through him, and he didn't really account for them too much. But, so there's a couple of different ways in which you can kind of binge eat, and you should be aware of that. And other people obviously can restrict this. This is emotional sort of eating, even though it's a little bit more disordered, or it might be a little bit more controlled or whatever. But it's all an attempt to kind of control or change an emotion that you're experiencing. The other thing to bear in mind as well, especially in today's climate, is that, for some of us, a situation like the current pandemic, it may have led to fear around the availability of food, and the accessibility of food, or maybe even the cost of food in the future. We saw this panic where people were going out and buying bags and bags of pasta and rice and all this food. And, it's like, it was just like fear, really, that forced us to buy that stuff, and maybe people, you wouldn't normally eat that amount of pasta, but because they had like this fear of accessibility and availability, fear of loss, that they just ate more and more of it, So you can see that there's much more to kind of eating than just, oh yeah, well, I'm just hungry, I need to eat a bit of food. So how do you kind of manage it? One of the ways that we teach at Team Bootcamp to manage emotional eating, and I'm going to come on to the first step, but let's go on to like the second step, okay, which is like, how do you kind of work with it? How do you, if emotional eating was like a big lion, how would you take it out and walk it and exercise it and all this kind of stuff? So the first thing is kind of just being really mindful as you're eating. So instead of like mindlessly eating, just slowing down a little bit and just really thinking about what you're doing. Think about how you're chewing food, how you're tasting food, how many times you chew it, really just be in the moment and think about like the emotions that you're triggering from the food, how things are changing, the feelings that you're getting, including the physiological feeling of your stomach becoming fuller, the chewing process, all this kind of stuff. Paula does a great exercise with her long-term boot campers, and we basically just fill the table full of sweets and says, right, we're gonna you can eat whatever you want, but you've got to do it mindfully. And once you start mindfully eating, they eat just so much less than they normally would. But we often don't do it. And a lot of food now, and you think about some of the fast food stuff, it's just so easy to digest. So much of the digestion process has taken place outside the body. We can turn off and not even think about it. We just ram food into our mouths and not even give it any thought. So the first thing I kind of suggest is just be a little bit mindful about what you're eating and how you're eating, and that's a great first step. Another thing as well is that if we're eating to change emotion, then what else kind of changes emotion, and what else can we use as a pacifier, as like a comfort blanket, whatever kind of emotion or like a bit of reassurance or whatever. And quite often like deep breathing, trying to do some like deep belly breathing can really help to change the state in the body, and it does take a little bit of effort to think, I can go for the easy option and grab the food, or I can just do some deep breathing. And one way around this, you do it in combination with a timer on your watch or whatever, and just think, right, okay, for 10 minutes, I'm just going to sit here and I'm just going to do some deep breaths and, try and just kind of de-stress a little bit, just bring myself down, try and change the emotion. And if I still want the food afterwards, then fair enough. But, just a little bit of deep breathing on a timer. Just think, set the timer, 10 minutes, 1 hour, whatever it is, because a lot of emotions and a lot of the physiological drivers for eating, they're not things that like build and build and build and build until you pop. They are things that come like waves lapping up against a beach. And if we could just wait for that wave to pass, then we can make better food choices afterwards. Obviously, any form of stress management is going to be a good thing. Whatever it is for you, whether it's going out and battering a punch bag, whether it's going for a walk with the dog, sitting in nature. For me, a big one is just like the sound of water is massive for stress management for me. I'll go and sit down by the river or whatever, and that really does kind of de-stress me. Another one that I love is the sauna. I love a sauna because you can't take your phone in there. People rarely speak to you in there, and you can just kind of sit in there. It's nice. It elevates the body temperature, and I just find it really, really relaxing, and that can help with stress management. But whatever it is for you, and I think it will be different for different people. Some people de-stress by going for a run. Other people, they want to lie on the settee and watch a bit of telly. Whatever it is, but if we can do a little bit of stress management today, it could just really help with our emotional eating tomorrow. And it's a constant thing that you need to keep on with. For some of you, keeping a food diary is going to help. Just accounting for those little bits of food and just tracking. So instead of like being mindlessly munching away on food, you're tracking it and you're thinking, well, I might feel a bit shitty now, and a bit of food might pick me up. But actually, I'm already approaching my daily calorific limits, and and I've got dinner to go or whatever. I can't be doing this snacking, and it's just being aware. And that awareness is really key. I'm going to talk about awareness a little bit in the next couple of sections, but food diary can just give you that little bit of awareness so that you're kind of tracking what you're doing. Mindfulness is another one. Any kind of mindfulness exercise, even in the moment. Again, it can be like a real proactive thing where your mindfulness today will tackle or help you tackle the emotional eating tomorrow. And again, hand in hand with that, any kind of relaxation techniques, whether it's a massage, or it's going to get your hair done, whatever it is that just helps you kind of relax. Better ways, more productive ways to change those emotions and to reduce that cortisol than filling your face, so you don't get caught up in the cycle. So when it comes to like kind of change in emotional eating, well, obviously, every bit of emotional eating is habitual. It just because we develop a habit. Now the food might change and the triggers might change, but you're obviously running this same routine. And if it's a habit, the good news there is that it can be changed. I reluctantly say it can be broken because habits can be really hard to break sometimes, especially if we've done it for a long time. But it's much easier sometimes to change that habit. The key to changing any habit is being aware. Being aware of when these habits, when this emotional eating tends to kick in. A common one that I always use as an example is the old wine o'clock. And a lot of personal training clients that I used to have, which predominantly it was sort of middle-aged women, they would get home, they'd get everything sorted, kids to bed, whatever, and then it's time for a glass of wine. And obviously it starts off with a little glass of wine, and then it just gets bigger and bigger and bigger until you're doing like a bottle a night, and then it becomes a bit of an issue. And, when you kind of talk to them, say, what is it? Is it the taste that you like about the wine? Is it the feel of the bubbles? Is it, what is it? Just like a switch that, okay, kids are in bed, everything's sorted, now this is my time. So is it like a signal? Really trying to dig into it and work out what it is, because once you kind of work out what it is you're doing there, what the reward is, then you can perhaps start to work out something that's better, that's going to give you a similar reward. Like, for example, instead of having a glass of wine, could you have a hot bath, like layers in the hot bath? And I know some of you will want to lie in the bath with a glass of wine, but if it's becoming if the emotional eating is becoming a problem, and I dare say if you're listening to this, then you're perhaps thinking, I could certainly do with cutting out some of my emotional eating. Then you really need to be looking at ways to be progressive, not regressive. You want to do things to make it better, not enhance the emotional eating that you're already doing. I hope we kind of get the idea behind that. Something else to bear in mind is that emotional eating and even weight problems often run in a family. So we often, we parents pass the emotional eating habits and rituals down to their kids, like Paula's grandma, like I was saying before. So quite often, if you're in a family block, then sometimes it might be a good idea to try and tackle this emotional eating as a group, as a block, as a family. And especially if you've got young kids, because obviously very rarely do overweight kids become lean adults. Very rarely. And it's so you kind of owe it to them to make an effort to tackle these things, because overweight kids become overweight adults, and not like when I was growing up, where you rarely saw an overweight kid really, and look at the weight problem we've got certainly in the UK right now. What's it going to be like in 20 years time? It really does scare me. So you kind of owe it to them. Right, the last thing I want to talk about is like identifying your triggers, and I want to finish on this one because it is really important. Like I said, awareness is the key to any kind of habit or any program that you're running. Just being aware of it just gives you a little bit of head start on how to stop it. But the first thing is to really look at the potential triggers, like and they can be anything from situations, places, certain feelings, times of the day, people that you socialize or interact with, certain jobs that you do either at work or at home. There's just a ton of things. And some of you might be thinking, well, the commute home is really boring, so I'll sit there with a bag of sweets on the passenger seat and I'll just munch away, and that will help me ease the boredom. Or it might be, I've got to work, I've got to do this supervision with somebody, and I hate doing it and I don't really like it. Right, well, what I'll do is I'll get it done, and then I'll head off to the bakery and get myself a bun or whatever, whatever it is. Just really think about the comfort food that you eat and the time, situations, locations, all that kind of stuff when you're just snacking on food that logically you shouldn't really eat or you shouldn't be eating. So any time where it's kind of linked to unpleasant feelings, or like you need to trigger positive emotions, like such as rewarding yourself for achieving a goal or celebrating an event, whatever it is, look for those things, and don't ever stop looking for these little triggers, because if you can work out these triggers, like I said, it really is the start of tackling this emotional eating. Okay, so we did a little bit of a dive there into emotional eating. Like I said, you're not alone. I think everybody in some form suffers or has to live with emotional eating on different levels. If it really is kind of causing you a lot of problems, and you need help with it, then reach out. Maybe we could do like a little coaching session, or maybe even consider coming to Team Bootcamp, where we tackle this kind of thing all the time. Anyway, hope you enjoyed it. Until the next podcast, take care.